The weight of the lash, torture and law in ancient Mesopotamia. The sun-baked plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the cradle of civilization rocked in slow rhythm. There rose a city of stone and ziggurats, Babylon. The air smelled of baked clay and incense, and the laws of men were carved deep into pillars of black basalt, eternal and unmoving. One such pillar stood in the public square, the Code of Hammurabi, towering and cold beneath the Mesopotamian sun. Upon it, King Hammurabi, chosen of the gods, had inscribed with divine authority, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In a small clay-walled house just outside the city's center, a potter named Uarnamu was accused of stealing a goat from his neighbor, Belteshazzar. The accusation rang loud through the district. "My goat is gone. I saw Uarnamu near my pens the night it vanished." There were no witnesses, no proof, but suspicion. And in ancient Mesopotamia, suspicion could carry the weight of truth when guided by the gods. Uarnamu, pleading innocence, was brought before the temple judge beneath the gaze of Ishtar's idol. The judge, a stern man robed in linen, consulted the code. "If a man is accused, and the charge cannot be proven," he said gravely, "let the gods decide." And so, the people gathered near the riverbank as the ceremony began, the trial by ordeal. Uarnamu was stripped to his waist. His wrists were bound with braided reed cord. A priest of Enki recited solemn words, invoking divine clarity. The judge gestured, and with a grunt, 2 guards pushed the potter into the river. Silence fell. All eyes stared as Uarnamu vanished beneath the muddy waters. Seconds passed, long, stretching seconds. A bubble broke the surface. Then a hand, then a head. Coughing, sputtering, but alive, Uarnamu pulled himself to the shore. A murmur ran through the crowd. The gods had spoken. The judge nodded. "He is innocent. Let the accuser pay the penalty for false witness." Belteshazzar's face fell. For lying, he was sentenced to receive 40 lashes with a whip. He would also owe Uarnamu a compensation of 10 shekels of silver. The law was clear. Not all judgments were so merciful. In another corner of the city, a bricklayer had struck his apprentice, and the boy lost an eye. The boy's father brought the case before the temple. The law was carved plainly. If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye. And so they did. No fine, no negotiation, only justice, weighed by the gods, written in stone, and soaked in blood. The sun dipped lower over the stepped terraces of Babylon, casting long shadows across the temple courtyards. Dust rose in golden plumes with every passing cart. Beneath the watchful eyes of stone lions, the hum of the city mingled with the quiet murmurs of judgment. In the hall of the scribes, a woman named Shala, a weaver, sat trembling before the magistrate. Her husband had died in a building collapse, and the house, now cracked and leaning, had been constructed by a builder named Eatman. She held in her lap a worn tablet showing the contract. Eatman had been paid fully. Her eyes were red from tears, but her voice was steady. The roof fell. The walls shifted. "My husband went to his rest under stone," she said. The magistrate glanced down at his own tablet, where the code spoke plainly. If a builder builds a house and it collapses, killing the owner, the builder shall be put to death. There was no hesitation, no room for argument. A man's life paid for a man's death. Eatman was brought in chains. He pled, swore the walls were sound, that the gods must have been angry. But the judgment stood. At dawn the next day, on the edge of the city, he was tied to a stake. The people watched in silence as the sentence was carried out, not for vengeance, but for balance. That was Hammurabi's way. One life for another, in equal weight. But the laws were not blind to status. In a northern district of the city, a nobleman named Zebabanurta struck a commoner's son with his chariot, crushing the boy's leg. The father cried out for justice. Yet when he stood before the court, the ruling was not the same as it might have been for equals. If a noble strikes a commoner and destroys his limb, he shall pay 1 mina of silver. The child's leg would never heal properly, but the nobleman kept his freedom, his wealth buying what would otherwise have cost him a limb. This was the way of the world. The code preserved order, not equality. It recognized ranks and differences. To violate a slave's rights was not the same as harming a free man. The law had its layers, its gods, and its prices. Even thieves, the lowest of criminals, had their place in the cycle of pain and justice. One moonless night, two brothers crept into a merchant's storehouse and made off with sacks of grain. But their footprints in the mud betrayed them, and they were soon brought before the court. The merchant demanded they be thrown into the fire, but the law had other designs. If anyone is caught stealing during a fire, he shall be thrown into the fire. But if it is an ordinary theft, each brother had their hands branded with a hot iron. Their heads were shaved, and they were sentenced to forced labor in the king's fields for 5 years. Branded and marked, their crime would follow them until death. Justice in ancient Mesopotamia was swift, harsh, carved in stone, unyielding. It was not meant to be merciful, but it was meant to be predictable. It was a way to tame chaos, to bind man to man and man to God. The ziggurats reached for heaven, but the laws kept feet firmly planted in the dust and blood of the earth. The seasons turned over the land of Sumer and Akkad. Floods came and went, carrying silt to the fields and washing away footprints, though never guilt. In the temple precincts, the scribes continued to etch rulings onto tablets, stacking them like bricks of truth, record, and warning. In a dusty village outside Kish, a midwife named Inanna was accused of causing the death of a newborn. The mother had died as well. Blood and breath vanished within hours of labor. The child's uncle, a bitter man with wealth and political ties, claimed the midwife used cursed herbs, invoking witchcraft to mask her clumsiness. Fear rippled through the town. Witchcraft was a shadow in Mesopotamian belief, an unseen hand behind sudden illness or unexplained death. The priests brought Inanna to the high temple of Ea, the god of wisdom and magic. She knelt, wrapped in rough linen, her eyes sunken but defiant. The judges had little patience for uncertainty. No proof, no witnesses, only accusation, and so, once more, the gods would decide. They prepared the bitter water, a sacred brew infused with curses and chants, meant to reveal the guilt or innocence of the accused. If Inanna drank it and lived, she was innocent. If she fell ill or died, the gods had judged her guilty. Before the crowd, Inanna drank. The temple was silent. Hours passed. She swayed, trembled, but did not fall. By sunset, she still breathed. She is clean, the priest intoned. The gods have spoken. The uncle turned red with shame. By law, he was to pay restitution for the false accusation, 60 lashes and 10 minas of silver to Inanna's family. In the capital, meanwhile, a scandal whispered through the palace halls. A scribe had been caught altering a royal decree, just a single mark in a clay tablet, changing a tax burden for a wealthy client. But even that tiny curve in the cuneiform script held heavy weight. Forgery was a crime of deception, a threat to the very bones of statecraft. The punishment? If a man falsifies a document, he shall be killed. No trial by river this time. The evidence was clear. The original decree had been archived, and his forgery stood exposed. He was marched in silence to the edge of the city, where the executioner waited. His family would inherit shame, but no fine. The scribe's life was forfeit. At the heart of it all stood the Black Pillar, the code itself, crowned with the image of Hammurabi receiving divine law from Shamash, god of justice. Citizens still came to read it, to point at its words, to weep or rejoice in its certainty. The code did not change. It did not forgive. But in a world where famine and war could fall from the sky without warning, at least the law was something solid, written in stone, spoken by gods, and carried out by men. The wind carried sand through the narrow alleys of Lagash, brushing against stone temples and clay ovens. The city bustled with the rhythm of laborers, merchants, and scribes, each moving through life tethered, in some way, to the code. One morning, the gates of the city opened for a caravan arriving from distant Mari. Among them was a slave trader with bruises on his face and fury in his eyes. He demanded an audience with the city magistrate. "One of my slaves escaped," he barked, "and has taken shelter here. A fugitive, property stolen from its rightful owner." The city guards confirmed it. A young man named Ibi Sin, thin and ragged, had been found near the well, seeking food and water. He claimed he had been beaten, starved, and worked near death. He begged for sanctuary. But sanctuary did not exist for slaves, not under the law. The magistrate turned to the code again, where the law was clear. If a slave says to his master, "You are not my master," his ear shall be cut off. The punishment was brutal, symbolic, and unflinching. The ear, the seed of obedience, was forfeit. Ibisin was dragged into the square. The blade flashed, and blood spilled on the stone. He screamed, but no one looked away. He was returned to the traitor with his sentence carved into his body. Ownership was sacred. Disobedience was treason to the order of things. But not all decisions favor power. In the city of Uruk, a dispute stirred the markets. A grain merchant named Tumulum had sold spoiled barley to a baker, who in turn had made bread that sickened half a dozen families. When summoned, Tumulum claimed ignorance. "The barley was good when I sold it," he insisted. "It must have spoiled in the baker's store." The judge listened carefully. "What did the weight say on the scales?" "The weight was stamped," Tumulum answered, "by the temple official." Another scribe stepped forward, holding the inspection tablet. The weights had been falsely marked. The merchant had paid the inspector to stamp rotten grain as good. That changed everything. If a merchant sells spoiled food knowingly, the code warned, his hand shall be cut off. The crowd held its breath. Tumulum dropped to his knees, weeping, pleading to pay double, triple the value. But the sentence had been used many times before. His hand, the right one, the one that measured, sealed, and deceived, was taken before sundown. Still, among the people, there were those who whispered, not in rebellion, but in awe. The code was cruel, yes, but it was predictable. A peasant might lose his hand, but he would not lose it for no reason. A noble might buy his way free, but only if the law allowed it. In the chaos of the ancient world, where gods struck with disease and kings fell in the night, at least here, justice had a shape. A man named Zamu, once a witness to a hanging, said to his son, "Better a law carved in stone than a god who speaks in dreams." The son, wide-eyed, nodded. For in Mesopotamia, to live was to be judged, not just by gods, but by men wielding tablets, scales, and whips. The moon rose full and pale above the banks of the Euphrates, casting a silvery sheen over the rooftops of Sippar. The streets were mostly quiet now, save for the flicker of oil lamps in doorways and the soft chants of priests offering prayers to Shamash, the god of justice. Beneath that sacred light, the law remained vigilant, even as the city slept. In a poor district near the river wall, a woman named Lamassi stood accused of adultery. Her husband, a fisherman often gone for weeks along the canals, had returned home to whispers and witnesses. A neighbor claimed to have seen another man leaving Lamassi's home at dusk. A basket seller spoke of seeing her touch the stranger's hand too long at the market. No act had been caught in the moment. Only rumors, glances, gestures. But in the eyes of the law, that was enough to ignite suspicion. Lamassi protested her innocence. "There is no man," she cried before the assembly. "Only my cousin, bringing salt from you are. I am blameless." The magistrate, his face drawn and hard, looked to the code once more. "If the wife of a man is caught lying with another man, they shall be bound and thrown into the river. If the husband wishes to spare his wife, the king may pardon them both." But no man had been caught. There was only one accused. So they offered Lamassi the river, trial by ordeal. She trembled, but agreed. Bound with flaxen rope, her wrists tied before her, she was led at dawn to the river's edge. The people watched in tense silence. The priest of Shamash spoke a ritual prayer, and the guards pushed her into the churning waters. She did not fight. She vanished beneath the current like a stone swallowed by the earth. Moments stretched long. A breeze rustled through the reeds. Then, sputtering, gasping, Lamassi surfaced, clinging to a root jutting from the muddy bank. The guards rushed to pull her ashore. The priest raised his hands. "She is innocent. The gods have judged." Her husband said nothing. He turned and walked away. Elsewhere, in the temple workshops, justice was being tested again. this time not with water, but with measurement. A carpenter named Enliliteshu had delivered a door frame to a nobleman's estate, but when the doors were hung, they cracked at the hinges. The nobleman summoned him to court, furious. I paid silver for wood that would last a generation. You gave me rot hidden beneath polish. Enliliteshu argued back. The wood was strong when I carved it. The house frame was flawed, not my craft. But the inspector of measurements was called, and with his stone weights and reed rule, he demonstrated that the timber was hollow at its core, deliberately selected from a dying tree, sealed with sap to hide its weakness. If a craftsman deceives in his work, the code declared, he shall replace the item and be whipped publicly. And so was done. Enliliteshu rebuilt the doorframe, and for his deceit, he was tied to a post in the marketplace and struck 40 times with a rod. Each blow echoed through the square. Not just punishment, but proclamation. Honor your craft, or the rod will find her back. Even children were not untouched by the reach of the law. In the temple school, where young scribes trained to press stylus into clay, a boy named Zudnaner was caught stealing a tablet from another student's satchel. He had scratched off the original name and replaced it with his own. The instructor brought him before the priest, who consulted the code, not for theft alone, but for tampering with sacred records. It was a serious matter. In a world ruled by words carved in clay, changing a name was like changing a fate. His punishment was not mutilation. He was too young. But he was beaten with a palm rod and expelled from the temple school. His father was made to pay 2 shekels of silver in apology to the victim's family. Zudnaner would not return to the world of scribes. The door to that future had been sealed by his own hand. In time, the cities of Mesopotamia would rise and fall. Babylon would burn, Akkad would vanish into dust, and the ziggurats would crumble like old bones. But the spirit of the code lived on, etched in a stone, passed down through lawgivers and kings. Justice, in that ancient world, was not about kindness. It was about balance, about placing weight upon a scale and watching it tip toward order or chaos. And though the hands of men were often cruel, the law was the steady voice of the gods, cold, unblinking, and eternal. In the twilight years of Hammurabi's reign, when his hair had grayed and his name echoed in temple prayers, the code had become more than a law. It was a ritual, a mirror of civilization itself. Scribes copied it onto tablets by torchlight. Judges recited its clauses from memory. Children learned its wisdom in song. It was not questioned. It was consulted, as one might consult the stars or entrails or omens in a cup of oil. And still, stories unfolded beneath its weight. In the city of Nippur, where scholars and priests shared dusty halls with merchants and guards, a dispute erupted over inheritance. A wealthy merchant named Tukulti-Enlil had died, leaving behind 2 sons from different mothers, one legitimate, born of a wife, the other, born of a concubine. The elder son, Ashur-bel, claimed the full estate. My mother was his wife under the gods, he said. The other is only the son of his bed. But the younger son, Idin-Sin, had a tablet, a will, scratched with care, naming him a rightful heir. The magistrate examined the document. The witnesses' seals were present. The code was consulted. If a man has sons by both a wife and a concubine, and he acknowledges both, they shall share equally in the inheritance, unless he has made a declaration otherwise. The will was valid. The estate would be split, land, cattle, silver, and tools, all divided down to the smallest measure. Ashur-bel stormed from the chamber, furious. But the law held. The dead could not speak, but their tablets did. Not all verdicts came in words and ink. In a salt flat near the outskirts of Larsa, a gang of men had been caught robbing travelers, ambushing small caravans, and stealing goods before slipping into the hills. They were dragged before the city judge in chains, dust-caked and sullen. Highway robbery, the judge spat, brings chaos to the land. What says the law? It was simple. If anyone commits a robbery and is caught, he shall be put to death. The sentence was carried out the next morning at the southern gate. They were hanged from wooden posts, an ancient warning in human form. For days, Carrion birds circled above, and travelers walked faster, hands close to their belts. Fear, too, was a tool of order. Yet the code was not without nuance. In Uar, a wine seller named Kadia had been accused of watering down her jugs and overcharging soldiers during a festival. She was a widow, and the wine shop her only means of survival. But she had done it. The measures were tested, and her scales found light. The law read, "If a tavern keeper cheats her customers, she shall be drowned." The judge, however, invoked another clause. If a widow supports herself by trade and is found guilty of deceit, she may be fined in silver rather than slain, if she has not endangered another's life. Kadia's face was stone as the judgment was read, 30 shekels, and a public apology. Her shop would close for 30 days. Her reputation, bruised, would recover, if only just. As Hammurabi himself aged, and his empire began to fray at its edges, the law remained his greatest work. His conquests faded, his statues weathered, but his code endured, clawed into the bones of the earth, carried on the tongues of judges, whispered in courtrooms and temple halls. To live under the code was to walk a narrow bridge between crime and consequence, between divine order and human failure. It did not forgive, but it did not waver. And in that harsh balance, the people found not peace, but something far more lasting, structure, a world that punished, yes, but also promised. As the stars turned above the black floodplains and the moonlight danced along the canals, even the humblest farmer in the smallest village knew. The gods watched, but the law ruled. In the village of Eridu, where reeds whispered along the marshes and fishermen cast their nets in silence, a curious case found its way to the temple court. A man named Gish, a tenant farmer, stood accused of failing to repay a debt. His creditor, a shrewd grain lender named Narib, claimed Lugel had borrowed a full cart of barley seed, but returned only half, blaming floods and pests. The debt had lingered through 3 seasons, and now Narib wanted restitution, not in grain, but in labor. "Let him work my fields until the debt is paid," he insisted. The magistrate did not question the debt. The contract had been sealed with both parties' thumbprints and witnessed by a temple scribe. But the code did not allow endless servitude. The judge read aloud from the clay. If a man borrows and cannot repay, he may be made to work off his debt, but only for 3 years. In the 4th year, he shall go free. The verdict was precise. Gish would serve Narib for 3 full harvests, not a day more. He would eat, live, and toil as a worker, not a slave. If Narib mistreated him, the law allowed Lugel to appeal to the temple. It was a delicate balance. Mercy without law was chaos, but law without mercy was tyranny. The code walked this line, harsh but bounded. Understood. Far to the north, in Akkad, where temples loomed over bustling streets, a brickmaker's daughter found herself entangled in a more dangerous kind of law, betrothal. Her father, a man of modest means, had promised her to the son of a merchant. A dowry had been agreed upon, livestock and textiles, but the merchant's son, it was soon discovered, had insulted the girl in public, mocking her limp and her family's poverty. Her father, enraged, tried to withdraw the engagement, but the merchant came to court with the original agreement in hand. He demanded either the daughter's hand or double repayment of the dowry. The judge looked to the stone. If a man gives a dowry and the father of the bride breaks the engagement, the dowry shall be returned twofold. The girl said nothing, her face pale. But then came the judge's second question. Was there a formal binding ceremony? Was there witness to the oath? There had been none, only a verbal promise, written later without the bride's presence. And so the law turned again. If no formal betrothal has been made in the presence of witnesses, no claim shall be upheld. The court ruled in favor of the girl. The agreement was void. The merchant left red-faced, his arrogance swallowed by ink and precedent. Her father bowed deeply to the judge. The girl said nothing, but her hands trembled with quiet relief. In these stories, which passed from mouth to ear long after the names were forgotten, the people saw more than fear. They saw certainty. They knew what crime brought, what accusation could do, what word could bind or unbind a fate. The code, chiseled with divine intent, told them, you may be poor, but your rights exist. You may be wronged, but justice is not a dream. Even the gods were invoked not for kindness, but for clarity. And so, whether in the markets of Babylon or the far fields of Lagash, the people lived and died not just under the gaze of heaven, but beneath the shadow of the law. ChatGPT said, and so the code endured, not only as law but as legacy. Long after Hammurabi's bones turned to dust and his cities rose and crumbled with the tide of empires, the black stone pillar remained. Buried, then unearthed, it spoke again in its silent tongue, its cuneiform teeth still sharp with memory. It told the world that once, in a time before parchment, before scroll and crown, there lived a people who tried to bind justice in stone. Their justice was not gentle. It maimed and branded, drowned and broke. It demanded blood for blood, grain for grain, silence for silence. But in doing so, it planted something rare in the soil of human civilization: accountability, not whim; order, not chaos. In its lines, we hear the rhythm of ancient footsteps, potters and priests, slaves and scribes, all walking paths lit by the stern torch of the law. Not perfect, not fair, but known, predictable, and that, in the ancient world, was a kind of salvation.